Hi everyone, welcome back to the Casual Watch Review channel. So in this week's episode, I've got a really interesting interview for us. So I drove up to Santa Barbara last week, which is sort of like 2 hours away from where I live, to sit down with a watch case engraver called David Sheehan. So he specializes in engraving Rolex watch cases. So when you see some of these designs, they're just stunning. Everything from your sort of classic scroll work to very intricate themes on these watches. So anyway, I sat down with him and the first question I asked him was kind of like how he got started in watch case engraving.
Well, I've been engraving for only about 6 years. I say only because most of the better engravers in the world have engraved much, much longer, and they all started as apprentices. And I did not have that luxury, but fortunately I got a great start by learning the trade from a couple of the best engravers in the country. And I went and studied with them in the beginning. I was serious about doing it, and I did not engrave watches at first, but I engraved knives and jewelry mostly. And as I began engraving more and more with the stainless steel custom knives, I became pretty adept at engraving stainless steel, which is considered to be one of the more difficult materials to engrave, depending on the type of stainless steel. And then I had a request to engrave a watch for a friend, and indeed it was very difficult. But I gave it a shot. It was not an expensive watch, and a kind of an experiment, and it went well. And then I did a couple more not too expensive watches, a gift from my rock and roll son, and another one for a friend. But then I realized that I really enjoyed this. And then I was asked to engrave watches if I was interested in engraving a watch, a Rolex watch for a company in England. And I sent them a few of my items I had engraved, and they got back to me and said they'd love to have me do one. So I got started with the Rolex watches with the company in England, and they trusted me, and I'm glad they did. But they came out very well. The first ones came out really well, and they were extremely pleased. And then the watch interest, as I posted some of my work, I got a little bit more feedback and a little more interest, and so I developed into a watch engraver primarily at this point, although I still engrave other things. But that's how I got started with it all, and it just took a lot of learning and grinding and practicing in the very beginning, early, to get to the point where someone would want you to engrave on their Rolex watch. At this time, I've engraved watches for people all over the world. I've engraved them in a number of them in England and Europe and Ireland. South Africa, I just completed a couple of fully engraved Daytonas for a South African client.
So I'm a massive fan of the work that you're doing, but the watch community isn't without its strong opinions. So certainly when you're engraving these high-end watches, what's the overall feedback that you get through like your social media account or other kind of watch collectors that you interact with?
Well, it's a good question. And so far I've gotten just, fortunately, nothing but excellent feedback, and happy customers, and people seem to really like my work. But I do know, now that I'm a little bit part of the watch community, so to speak, I know that there are strong opinions on defacing a valuable watch, and I totally understand that. And sometimes as I'm digging into stainless steel with my engraver and cutting into it, it crosses my mind that, I'm defacing a very beautiful watch. But it's a small market. Everybody's entitled to their opinion, and some people have these watches, and they may have multiple Rolex watches, and all their friends do too. But this really does set it apart from any other Rolex. And I think once they get it and they wear it, they tend to get a bit more attention than they did before, and they like that.
So we've seen some of the intricate designs that you've been doing, but how long on average would it take to engrave a watch case and the band and the case back when you're doing one of these full coverage projects?
Yeah, a full coverage project can easily take 100 hours, and sometimes considerably more. And it's hard. You just can't engrave continuously because it's pretty demanding. You're working under a microscope, and no slips allowed, so you're a little bit, on edge, although after you get a little more relaxed after you've done more, but you can't relax too much. And so it takes a toll on you during the day. I know other engravers, especially younger ones, I think can engrave a lot more hours per day than me, but I can't. So I'd like to spend some of my day doing design work, and then, if I get up to 4 or more hours a day engraving, I'm pushing it. But yeah, it takes a long time to do these watches, and I have not found any shortcuts yet. There's just one way to do it, and that's just, a little bit at a time, and to make the job come out with clean edges and a clean look, it just takes a lot of time.
So that's an interesting point. So we've looked at some of the intricate designs that you've done, but how do you come up with the designs in general?
Well, I started out with learning how to design and draw scroll work for knife engraving and on jewelries, and I really love the scroll designs. My teachers who taught me were probably some of the best scroll designers in the world, and so that's the basis of it. Most people like to have some type of scroll work or running leaf work, but then again, I get people who inquire and they ask for a specific design to represent something that they really care about. It could be where they live, part of the environment. I've been asked to engrave various fishes and crabs, and then sometimes someone just wants a theme. They want a theme. So they want like a Japanese theme, and there'll be a multiple variety of Japanese designs, or a Chinese theme I've done recently. I've done Western themes. So I've also engraved and incorporated personal logos or even their initials and names, or do a nice monogram and put it into a design. So usually a customer has some idea of what they like. They'll say they like something I did before. And if that's the case, I never really replicate a watch design, but they can give us something along those lines. And sometimes they'll send me, a picture of something they really like and say, I'd like to have something along these lines incorporated into it. And so it's really, that's what makes it fun for me. The design part of it is really great. And then I design it. I come up with sketches until I'm happy. And usually I'm the toughest customer. But when I'm finally happy with the design, then I'll send them a sketch and say, what do you think about something like this? And, fortunately for the most part, they love it. They're excited, or they might want it tweaked a little, or they say a little less of this, a little more of that. That's fine. And then we move forward. We don't start cutting until the engraving design they're happy with it, and I'm happy with it.
With the advent of more modern technologies like laser graving and CNC machines, do you think it will ever take the place of skilled craftsmen like yourself?
To a degree, it does, for engravers who are, in the trade of just maybe, trophy engraving. They only do lettering of some type. But to be honest, this hand engraving niche, and especially because I do a lot of deep relief hand engraving, it adds a three-dimensional touch, and that's almost impossible to get with a machine. And also what you're engraving on makes a big difference. It's one thing if you just have a flat piece that maybe a machine can come close to doing what you can do, and that's fine. But a watch, for example, there's such a variety of components. Take the lugs, for example. Those things wrap around, and you're having to move that while you're engraving. Your vise is turning and rotating, and the links even. It's very, very difficult for a machine. And people know, collectors and people who are true watch aficionados, and they love watches, or they love knives or jewelry, they can tell the difference between a hand engraved piece or a machine engraved piece.
So if somebody else wanted to get started in engraving or watch engraving, how would you go about getting started?
Well, I get that question occasionally, and the same questions I asked when I first started, I remember, and so I try to pay it back a little bit, and I give people my honest opinion, and I say don't rush out and buy a bunch of engraving equipment. Save the money and just go to an instructor. And there are darn good instructors around that you can find, or engraving schools or classes, and go there and use their equipment and first see if you like doing it. I wasn't sure when I started it how it would work out. Fortunately, I had a blue-collar background, and I was a precision welder when I was a young man, and so I was, I think, blessed with a good set of hands, and that helps. But you don't know how the engraving is going to go until you actually try it. And working under a microscope also, or a heavy lens, it's really different, and you have to see if you can adapt to that. So by all means, and not to mention that the instruction you'll get versus trying to get it yourself or practice yourself by watching a video or a book, one-on-one with the instructor, your learning curve will be dramatically quicker. So I recommend that you start with an instructor. Then after that, you buy books, you buy videos, and you buy a bunch of practice plates. And you practice. And I mean a lot of hours, because it takes a long time to start to get the feel and the hang of it. And there's so much to learn. And even now, I continually read and study and talk to other engravers. And I do plan on attending some advanced classes in the near future even. You have to keep learning all the time. So I recommend that you start that education process properly, invest in that, then get equipment secondary. When I did invest in tools, I invested in some pretty high-end tools, and from both Lindsay engraving tools and GRS. Both those are the two main companies that make it, and I've got a little bit from both of them. But my main engraving tools from Lindsay, and it's called a palm engraver, and it's a very fine tool. It uses carbide gravers, and the carbide gravers are a very high quality graver. And there's a mid-range carbide, and then there's a carbalt, which is extremely hard. But each one has a different purpose for a different metal, whether it's a softer metal, a silver, gold, or harder metals as in steel, or especially in stainless steel. Because you have to go through a lot of learning curve to learn how to sharpen, but then once you get the sharpening down, and depending on what type of engraver it is, a flat one, or it could be a single point engraver. There's a variety of different engravers, but the sharpening has to be done perfectly, and that's probably the most important thing to learn first, is how to sharpen. Because if your engraver isn't sharpened properly with the right sharpening equipment and tools and templates, then you're not going to have any luck at all with the engraving portion of it. The sharpening is it's all about that. And you have to have a good vise and a good microscope. I've gone through a couple lesser priced ones to begin with, but now I have a pretty nice scope.
So we've talked about you engraving existing watches, but have you ever been approached by any of the big watch brands to create like a limited edition model or do engraving for them at the point of sort of manufacture?
Yeah, I've been approached by a few watch brands and makers, and we've had good conversations about the possibility of, them offering a custom, hand engraved line. But it never really got serious. And I've even thought about creating my own micro brand. I actually built my own little watch from pretty nice components. And then I engraved the dial of the watch, just the dial of the watch, and thinking that maybe someone that wanted a hand engraved watch wouldn't have to, spring for quite as much as when you do a fully engraved Rolex, for example. So when my schedule gets maybe thinned out again a little bit, I get a little more time to relax and think about things like that, then maybe I'll consider it at that time.
So a question I had about the engraving process, I've always wondered what's the black filler that you use to actually bring the engravings out?
Well, the black background, it can be a whole variety of things, and it depends on what it is. I learned from my instructors how to use a simple black enamel, and then also some ink, some printer's ink, certain types of printer's ink. A lot of gun engravers will use that as well. And what it does, it just creates contrast. Some of my work, I don't use any black filler. I'll just do a nice stippled design in the background. But other people, the contrast does look good. I mean, the black applied properly not only can last for a long time and not be any problems with it, but it creates so much more pop and in the design.
I know we can't talk about specific commissions, but what range cost-wise would you be looking at to do maybe a case back and a bracelet on a watch like some of the Rolexes you've been doing recently?
Yeah, a fully engraved Rolex, or pretty much a fully engraved Rolex, as I mentioned to you, it takes 100 hours and more to do it, and so you're looking about $10,000. It could be less, $6,000 or $7,000 for a simpler design. It depends on the coverage. Sometimes on the bands, I'll just do the center links, which is less than doing all the links, or just the outside rows on the links. Sometimes not the back, just the case. Sometimes some of the watch models have a bezel, some don't have a bezel to engrave. So it varies, but it's just expensive. And it's not expensive because I'm, charging overly high rates. It's just expensive because the way I do it anyway, and I think the way most good engravers do it, there's no shortcuts. It just takes time, a lot of time, to end up with a really clean design that makes me happy and hopefully makes the customer happy.
So we've talked about engraving sort of very intricate, small watch cases and things like that, but have you ever engraved anything larger?
Oh yeah, there's been quite a variety of projects, and some of the largest came from England, some very large trophy cups from polo. And I've done some very large polo cups, silver cups, and golf awards, some large ones. And it's a different animal when you got that under your, engraving microscope. Well, I can't even put some of those under the microscope. You have to use the lens for those. Also, things like I've done some guitar pick guards for a rock and roll star, including my son. My son Dustin's a well-known rock and roller and has a band in LA and Santa Cruz, and so I engraved a pick guard for him and for another person as well. And then also, one of the largest things I've done is chopper engraving. Yes, motorcycle choppers. Another son of mine is an extremely talented chopper builder. And he is currently, and I don't do a lot of this and only for my son, It's very time consuming, but it's large. And there's some pictures on my accounts. I think you'll see soon. He's just building a chopper right now that is entered into a national contest, and it's been whittled down to the 6 finalists in the country, and he's one of them. And the bike he's building has it's an old Harley Davidson, and I've engraved the engine, the rocker covers, and also the cam covers. And then I helped him with the scroll design and the paint job, and it looks fabulous.
So we talked about the risks of the piece moving. So what do you actually use to help secure the watches when they're in their vise?
Well, that's a really good question, Sam. I'll tell you why, because we call it work holding. And work holding, whether it's a knife or jewelry or a watch, it is so critical to have what you're engraving be solid and no vibration. You have to cut out the vibration. That's an area that engravers get extremely creative. Most engravers I know have created their own work holding tools. There's some that are standard, but many times you have to create your own work holding tool for that particular piece you're working on. But there are some standard compounds that help. Everything from hot glue can be used. And then there's a material called Thermolock that I use. That's as you heat it up, it gets soft enough to press your piece in, and then as it hardens, it's just like metal. It's that's a good one to use. But each item you're engraving has, one of those items can work better than the other. But work holding is a real important piece, and you have to get very creative sometimes in how you attach and fasten it. It usually ends up in your vise, and the vise holds the work holding component. Had to make a really special one time for an Apple Watch because you can't take them apart. Most of the watches I get are just the components. The customer's watchmaker takes it apart and sends me the components, and it's much easier to not have to worry about, when you're gluing, clamping, doing whatever you need to do to hold it without having the watch itself. But this Apple Watch was all one piece, and I had to get pretty creative there. And with a little insight from the only other engraver I ever heard about that had engraved one of these, and he gave me some insight. And we do help each other, and a very generous community, by the way. And I mentioned earlier, I think I can only engrave so many hours a day, and boy, I just have to shake my head and walk away. But I have great outlets. Even though I'm an old guy now, I try to stay somewhat in shape, and I'm an active golfer. I love the game, and so I play when I can, or just go hit some balls. I go to the gym. I walk. Santa Barbara is a beautiful town, and I've got some great walks out there that I take nice long walks. I used to run, but I don't do that anymore. But another thing I do at the gym, instead of just a regular gym, I do boxing workouts. I have a little bit of a history of boxing. I know it sounds odd, someone that would use their hands in an intricate fashion would strap on boxing gloves, but I've just always loved it. And even to the point a couple of years ago, I competed in a Masters tournament, and so it's. But I don't compete. That was it. That was my last competition, and I did well. So I'll just leave it at that. But I love the workouts, and I have some boxing bags even right near my engraving studio. I just work out a little here and there. But I have a couple of great boxing gyms around here that are really fun for me.
So a big thank you for David for spending the time with us today. As always, guys, if you've got any questions, leave them in the comment section down below. You can contact me on the casualwatchreview@gmail.com or on my various social media accounts. So thanks again, and I'll see you all next time on the Casual Watch Review channel. Thanks, guys. Bye.